Well, hi, everybody. My name is Benjamin Smith. I'm an assistant professor of architecture and director of the graduate architecture programs at Tulane University. Before our students begin their presentations, I'd like to say a few words to contextualize the work that you'll all be seeing today. First, however, I do want to thank a few people for all of their support of graduate thesis. First, our dean at Tulane School of Architecture, Iñaki Alde, who proposed we do a more public event like this. So thanks, Iñaki. Naomi Engler and Kristen Jones for all their support to publicize and coordinate the details of doing this event. And Archinect for promoting our event, as well as all of you who are tuning in. So thanks for being here. We really appreciate it. I'd also like to acknowledge our graduate thesis faculty, which included Scott Bernard, Emily Taylor Welty, Kentaro Tsubaki, Ann Yoakum, and myself. I'd also like to explain a little bit about our thesis sequence at Tulane School of Architecture. Generally speaking, I believe that architectural education encompasses three areas of learning: vocabulary, context, and application, which gets spread across beginning, intermediate, and advanced stages of a student's academic career. In the Professional Master of Architecture program at Tulane, thesis represents to me the clearest moment when a student is able to apply what they have learned through development of original research and design. I should also state that for our graduate students, thesis is optional. There are several reasons for this, but one of the main reasons is that due to some of our design build studios lasting longer than one semester, requiring thesis would prohibit taking some upper level studios. Our thesis sequence, which we restructured just prior to this last academic year, and these students you'll be seeing today are the first students to go through this sequence, transitioned to students applying to work with a specific faculty member at the school as their thesis director. So the thesis director oversees the student's thesis over 2 semesters in 3 courses, which includes a 3-credit thesis research course in the fall semester, and then in the spring semester, a 6-credit thesis studio and a 3-credit independent thesis research course. In the fall semester, the students developed research proposals from a common template that included a thesis synopsis or abstract, identifying primary questions and hypotheses, a subject overview, a literature review, an understanding of relevant research methods, a project timeline, and projecting the contribution of the thesis, as well as necessary figures and diagrams, and an annotated bibliography with working knowledge of approximately 50 pertinent texts. So the students presented their proposals at the end of the fall semester and then dove into the design work for their theses this spring. Because of the independent nature of the work, students and their faculty directors could structure how they would meet for the course content. So for example, I would meet with each of my 2 students 1 hour each once per week in the fall semester, and then 1 hour each twice per week in the spring semester. This semester, we'd initially scheduled 3 reviews. However, after moving to remote instruction halfway through the semester, instead of a penultimate review, we held a presentation rehearsal so the students could get familiar with presenting over Zoom. And then we conducted our final review with outside critics and Tulane faculty over Zoom a couple weeks ago. And I have to say, I have been incredibly impressed with the effort of our thesis students and all of our students at Tulane. I really couldn't be more proud of the way that they have handled this difficult situation while maintaining the collegiality, conviction, and creativity that I've come to know about our students. So today, you'll be seeing the work from the following students: Henry Brereton, who has been directed by Scott Bernard; Kalyn Faller, who is directed by Emily Taylor Welty; Mengning Lan, who goes by Xiao Lan, who is directed by Kentaro Tsubaki; and Casey Last, who is directed by me; and Lucy Satzewich, who is also directed by me. So thank you, students, for doing another round of presentations for all of us. It's really great to see you all again after a couple weeks away. Without further ado, Henry, are you ready to take us away? All right, fantastic. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Okay. My name is Henry Brereton, and I worked with Scott Bernard on his thesis titled Race, Buildings, and the Cultural Middle Ground. For my thesis, I chose to investigate ways in which we can improve the resiliency of the built environment within coastal cities threatened by flooding events. Our coastal cities are in danger of abandonment. It is estimated that there will be roughly $120 billion of damages done to coastal homes as a result of flooding by the year 2045. 40% of the U.S. population resides in a coastal county, and 311,000 homes will experience flooding on an average of 26 times a year within the next 30 years. There are already plenty of houses that are raised in coastal areas across the country. Those that choose to raise their home will be all right if their neighborhood takes on 5 feet of water. But I was more concerned about the impact flooding has on the block itself. What happens to those who didn't raise their home? After a major flooding event, a block once filled with homes becomes a bleak reminder of the damage caused by flooding once only 2 or 3 families can safely return. I wanted to see if there was a way to allow for every member of a neighborhood to return to their home after a storm. What emerged from my research last semester was the notion that this problem we are facing presents an opportunity to investigate through design how we can reduce the damages done to coastal communities threatened by flooding events and allow those residing in those communities to safely and swiftly repopulate in the wake of a major storm or flooding event. Raised Buildings in the Cultural Middle Ground seeks to establish a framework for design thinking regarding the current issues created by sea level rise and flooding that affects coastal cities. This thesis suggests a new way of thinking regarding the occupation of a built environment that responds to environmental changes while remaining mindful of the culture and context of the site. I looked at examples of solutions to intermittent flooding at a variety of scales. I found that there are an abundance of solutions that lie on either end of the spectrum. On one end, there are low-cost, low-impact solutions such as the sidewalks constructed in Venice during an Aqua Alta. On the other end is something much more familiar to New Orleanians, which is our hurricane storm damage risk reduction system. The most recent addition to the system was one of the largest civil works projects ever undertaken, which cost roughly $14 billion. In April of 2019, it was found that the system would no longer provide the 1% level of risk reduction as soon as 2023. With that being said, I understood that there are very few proposals for intervention that lie in the vast area in between raised sidewalks and $14 billion flood walls. I chose New Orleans as my site due to its long history of flooding, in addition to the strong sense of community each neighborhood in the city holds. I recognize that with raising housing comes the possibility of having to sacrifice certain spatial qualities that exist in our neighborhoods today. However, moving forward, I wanted to see if I could preserve some qualities that are unique to our neighborhoods. The qualities and aspects of life in New Orleans that I chose to focus on preserving include the porch culture, cultural events, proximity to neighbors, the informal elaboration of consistent types, the relationship to the street front and the built environment, and extending the useful life of existing buildings. To begin my design process, I chose to look at the density of 15 neighborhood blocks around the city that lie on the fringes of a flood zone. Sites located near a flood zone are ideal due to the fact that they present the opportunity to design for a gradual increase in flooding as time passes. What I found was that the blocks contained some form of a key lot that created a unique open condition in the center of each block. I found that these center spaces may allow for a new inverted raised block condition in regards to the street front. I wondered what it might look like to focus all activity towards the center of each block once the traditional ground street front is no longer able to be occupied when flooded. I chose to express the way in which we may be able to successfully transition to life surrounded by water through a series of block diagrams illustrating the gradual changes made to the built environment. The original conditions consist of buildings resting on the ground plane and are made up of original New Orleans housing typologies. Our current conditions are primarily made up of buildings on the ground plane with the exception of a few homes that are raised. And the next phase I'm proposing would raise existing buildings and include raised infrastructure. The following phase aims at increasing the density of the block as the need for housing grows when lower parts of the city become uninhabitable. Here's a section just illustrating how this would work in a flooding situation. So the ground level would have potentially commercial that could evolve into boat storage as time goes on. And the second level would contain commercial zones, ground level or ground floor residential, community space, walkways, and a new interior street. And the third level would include residential and green space. The final phase within the scope of this thesis would be living with water. The ground level would contain strictly road parking and loading zones for water-based transportation. And the second level would include commercial, ground floor residential, community space, walkways, and green space. And the third level would include residential, green roofs, and community space. Here's the section showing how that might look within the final phase. Each space underneath the dwelling would have a bay to house boats as they would go in and out there. And then here's a 3-block isometric of my site. And I actually chose 3 blocks surrounding the Ferret Street corridor because I wanted to explore how a commercial corridor would look like with this raised environment. And here is a block section perspective of these 3 blocks. And then here are some perspectives just showing what life might look like with this final phase. Of course, I had to include Mardi Gras in one of our renderings. Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Henry. Kalyn, are you ready to roll?
Yeah.
Great, thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kalyn Fowler, and I've had the privilege of working with Emily Taylor-Welty for the last year on the Maker Synergy, building communities through collaborative design. Human beings have an innate urge to use their hands and build, but most are not given the opportunity, education, or resources to do so. In many readings discussing design-build education, separations of stakeholders are often broken down into the categories of profession, academia, and the community. Looking at the cross intersections of these adjacent groups of people, we can see that design build, public interest design, and design centers operate between certain categories. Within these titles, there are many programs and hybrid making models that exist, and yet there are still people who are excluded. And to go a step further, I would ask you to question what happens if you remove the inherently hierarchical design titles of these stakeholders and look at the intersection. And then go a step further in prioritizing an equitable system that aims to see all people as makers of varying skills and expertise, and to intersect at the Maker Synergy. The Maker Synergy is the interaction or collaboration of 2 or more maker organizations, group of makers, or individual makers to produce a combined effect that is greater than the sum of their separate effects within their shared community. A case study analysis was done and programs went through an extraction process of their mission statements, areas of interest, and areas of improvement. Through the extraction of the mission statements of the case studies, a hierarchy of importance can be seen with a clear emphasis on building community design students. The case study research and the conception of the Maker Synergy has helped develop a framework of questions. With these questions in mind, the Maker Synergy seeks to propose adapted and new design-build education systems through the production of the Maker Synergy Handbook to act as an accessible tool that promotes a future where communities can utilize the people, resources, and knowledge of existing universities, partner with the expertise of community members, and the experience of professional designers and builders to teach, learn, reflect, design, build, collaborate, and make for, in, and with their shared communities. This research has allowed me to encounter a multitude of publications, but there's still a lacking of comprehensive reflection of design-build programs balanced through a lens of critique and praise. This has inspired the production of the Maker Synergy Handbook, a handbook reflecting on design-build's past to inform a more accessible and impactful community design-build future. As you can see in the table of contents, the bulk of the handbook pulls from the aforementioned common areas of interest and improvement. In the first half, specific build projects were selected from the case studies to explore further in the Learning from Design Build's past chapter. These programs and systems have helped inform the second half of the handbook for creating a new design build future. We'll be discussing 2 categories of each of these chapters. One key area of improvement is the lack of opportunities for community members to participate in the hands-on design and build process. Last semester at the Tulane Small Center for Collaborative Design, students were challenged with a 2-week blitz build to design and build out YEP Design Works' new storefront. The Small Center students and the YEP designers collaboratively designed the scheme of the project, but when it came time to build, only the Small Center students participated in the construction. There was a clear barrier of where community partners could participate and where they could not. Another design center that sparked a unique area of interest was DOT Agency. In the conception of the agency, founders Nils Gore and Shannon Chris agreed that community access and collaboration would be integral to DOT's work, which can be seen through their storefront. This space, they have created a 20 keys concept, which they're reflecting on in the following quote, where they said, "Anyone who has a compelling idea for how the space could be used would be given a key." Now looking at the second half of the book, creating a new design build future. Every design build program is affected by its context. The maker synergy is a system that can be adapted to its location and the makers that are in there. But the intentions here are to ground the maker synergy in Buffalo, New York, and create a collaborative maker system that can play a role in the revitalization of a Rust Belt city. When discussing Rust Belt cities, Phil Enquist, SOM's previous head of global planning, asked, "Doesn't it make sense to reinvest in our urban past?" The Maker Synergy aims to do exactly that through the collaboration of existing architecture and design firms, existing hybrid maker models, the public universities that exist within the city, and also the utilization of public transportation to help maximize accessibility. And that would all overlap in the Maker's intersection zone, where ideally the Maker Synergy would strive. Another system within the Design Build handbook is the Design Build charrette. The Maker Synergy promotes all makers to participate in design build efforts within their community. And this is a daunting task for people who have never existed or operated in the world of designing and building. The Maker Synergy Design Build charrette is a small scale on-ramp to democratizing design build. The deck includes 6 cards. The introduction cards, which walks the facilitator through how to organize the design charrette. These charrette cards describing the makers and the prompts, and the resource cards to really break things down to the scale of a maker and to define the terms that were used in the previous cards. This handbook also contains 2 examples of a completed design build charrette that reflects on the power of collaboration, accessible language, engagement, and much more. The community-wide implications of accessing this education are endless and will hopefully encourage more individuals to begin to identify as makers aiming to synergize. It is up to the current makers to advocate for sharing of resources, skills, opportunity, and knowledge so that more empowered, diverse makers are contributing to the built environment. If put into action, the systems proposed by the Maker Synergy and the Maker Synergy Handbook have the potential to provide a more accessible, inclusive, and impactful community design build future. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Kalyn. Shalan, are you ready to rock and roll?
Yeah. Kalyn can. Hi, I'm Shalan. I've worked on my thesis habitat with Professor Kentaro Tsubaki on this topic of improving the living situation of the urban population in Hong Kong. I'm proposing residential solutions to the housing crisis and living problems in Hong Kong by building floating communities in Victoria Harbour. Hong Kong, a city of 7.5 million people, is one of the world's densest and most unequal places to live. The population density is not as high as in New York City, but the residential distribution is highly concentrated in the urban center. Housing is not affordable to the local population. The housing price and rents in Hong Kong are higher than New York City, London, or Paris for apartments less than half the size. The price of a typical home in Hong Kong costs more than 20 times the median salary. And there are 210,000 Hong Kong residents living in illegally subdivided apartments. For example, one apartment is divided into 4 subdivided apartments with severe fire safety and air quality issues. Currently, over 250,000 people are waiting for access to public housing. However, the city's affordable housing program has not kept up. This map shows the entire land territory of Hong Kong. Hong Kong was handed back to Chinese authorities as a special administrative region in 1997. It has a high degree of autonomy for 50 years and is dominated by an open and market-driven economy. In Hong Kong, land is government-owned and controlled. For years, the government has followed a policy to sell leases of land through auction and tender. It represents up to 30% of government income. Behind the glamorous harbor view with skyscrapers, there are 200,000 people living in bed space apartments. It refers to a house that contains 12 or more people who rent individual bed spaces. So, in order to house all the local population, how many houses do we need to provide? Based on population growth and current housing amount, if we use average data 3 people per unit, we will need at least 1.26 million units by the end of this century. And if we take a typical 30-floor residential high-rise as an example, 8 units per floor, we will need 5,250 high-rises to house everyone. The government is planning on a reclamation project. It will cost $64 billion US, and yet will only meet 30% of the gap and will cause permanent damage to the harbor. To rethink the size and the cost of living, I looked at Alejandro Aravina's affordable housing project in Chile. Instead of building a full house, we will provide half of a house by including self-construction. In this case, first, it will lower the construction cost for the government to build more houses with the same amount of money. The owners can expand the unit based on their financial situation. And second, it provides a lower price for the owners to purchase. The income from the owners will be used to build more units in the future phases. With the $64 billion from the reclamation project, we can build 48% units of the housing need in the first phase. And it will only take about 35% of the harbor area compared to the reclamation project. And the units are designed in modules. So where are we going to build these units? I overlapped the existing buildings with protected parks. It turned out Hong Kong has little land for new housing development. But if we include water, there's more to consider. With ferry routes and freight shipping areas, we have this non-buildable area map. And this inverted map shows the buildable area in purple, mostly on the water. Since there's not much land to build on, the only way to expand is to build on the water. Public transportation is highly developed and very important to people's daily life in Hong Kong. Based on buildable area, public transportation system, and land use along the coastline, I picked my main sites to start the first phase of the floating community in Victoria Harbour. To explore methods of urban development and architectural growth on the water, I looked at 3 presidents from the 1960s. Kendall County's plan for Tokyo has a hierarchy of circulation systems, from the civic access branch to the residential areas. I borrowed the concept and built my community from the coastline to the primary paths and then to each neighborhood. Venice Hospital used the concept of map building, starting from minimal individual units to care unit and then to building units, and repeat and grow from that. In my design, the individual units aggregate into neighborhoods and then to communities. Una Friedman proposed building space frame structures above the water surface and filling modules into the structure. In my case, the government will build structures for each neighborhood and then they will be filled by residents. From this, I came up with 3 strategies for my design. Horizontal provides more accessibility to nature. Flexible allows change and adaptation in the long term. And autonomic gives the residents more power to create their own living space. This is one neighborhood with 28 units and a communal courtyard in the middle. This is showing how the community grows. Each community includes 5 neighborhoods with a water plaza in the middle and a dock on the end. Between the residential communities, there will be public public facilities serving the surrounding residents. And this strategy will reduce the population density to about 20,000 people per square kilometer. This is the water plaza. This is the path between residential neighborhoods. And this is showing public facilities. This is the site plan, the section. And the red zone shows the weekly tides in Victoria Harbor, which are from 2 feet to 6 feet. The community will rise and fall with the tides. In the end, I just want to point out the housing crisis is one of the most severe and urgent problems in Hong Kong. The Hong Kong government is already working on the solutions, yet most are very controversial. It is unpredictable what the policy will be after 2047. So I think right now is the best time to introduce this new way of living to the city. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Xiaolan. Casey, are you ready to roll?
Hello, my name is Casey Lass, and I had the pleasure of working with Benjamin Smith as my thesis director this year. This thesis is titled Realizing Legibility, the Construction of Narrative. This thesis analyzed representation as a means of communication in architecture. I did that through looking at the city being a metaphorical place or non-place that may or may not exist. Architecture is unique in its ability to visually communicate ideas. The project involved research of relevant scholarship in order to create criteria for evaluation of representations. The work participates in the field of representation, first as an analytical study and then as an exploration in employing those methods. If representations are legible, then they are realized. I ultimately attempted to communicate a narrative through drawing these 7 scale shifts. The product is not to be a final proposal, but a visualization of dystopia that functions as a representational exploration of techniques. The nebulous of research is inductive, centered around the topic of the city. This visual bibliography represents a matrix of 4 major categories: research methods, theories of representation, urban theories, and representations of the city. Where Robin Evans and Stan Allen explain the nuances and implications of visual communication, the fictions of super studios and the manifestos of Le Corbusier and Koolhaas mobilize those concepts. The 12 cautionary tales were written narratives of ideal cities, each with a singular image. Like super studios' ideas of radical preservation, they are diagnoses of the present reality, accessed and critiqued through imaginations of fictional ones. These ideas explore polemic with satire and cynical irony. Le Corbusier, on the other hand, presented Plan Voisin on a number of occasions throughout his career. This too diagnoses the present reality by representing an ideal one, but is evidently not viewed as satirical work. It is conversely avant-garde. Architectural representations involve the superimposition of fictions and realities. Abundant and diverse, these projects can all be evaluated on their ability to be understood and read. These examples have been pulled from the text in the bibliography and begin to evaluate the aspects of legibility. Piranesi's etchings of Rome demonstrate a scientific and archaeological perspective of the city, despite them being largely fantastical. They are read as such because they're demonstrated with the same qualities as Noli's map of Rome. 250 years later, the drawings prove relevant content for exploration as Yale University and Peter Eisenman, also Jeff Kipnis and OSU, Aurelian Dogma, explore these through 3D modeling, utilizing contemporary representation strategies. I began to explore what is embedded in the format and techniques of architectural drawing and representation. These images are photos of various model drawings I created using digital fabrication techniques and various materials and content. I set out to evaluate the techniques by defining a subset of desired outcomes, including legibility, which is the large umbrella category that tells us that the images aside are maps, with lines for street grids, shapes for buildings, and amorphic forms denoting water and land. Ambiguity is its adjacent and at times dichotomous counterpart. It allows for the curation of information and less obvious distinctions. Perhaps physical layering conveys depth, or perhaps it conceals content. Identity varies from obvious caricature to a clear and stateable truth. Separate from legibility, it is typically demonstrated as that which is symbolic or representative of a subject, for example, an island, a building, or a form. Disguise, like ambiguity, conceals that which is not iconic, diagrammatic, or perhaps true. These show elements of recognition to situate the viewer, but then the elements that conceal or mask the subject. These techniques aid in the construction of the representations in both the conceptual and physical manifestations. They have been attempted through the following methods of manipulation: subtraction, addition, disruption, inversion, proportion, and function. This matters because legibility elevates what is shown by raising the question, what is shown showing? Embedded in the structure of architectural drawing and the discipline are certain knowns. The design project, the construction of narrative, is where I've tested the techniques to ultimately convey polemic, telling a story through drawing. Like conventional architecture drawing sets, the drawings explore the city in a succession of scale shifts from city to building. Inspired by the structure of writing in George Perrec's Species of Spaces and Other Pieces, where he used scale shifts as a literary technique to reveal and curate information. This project is a hypothetical revisualization of Manhattan. It imagines the future. In the spirit of Super Studio's ideas of radical preservation and Le Corbusier's ideal cities, it assumes the following assumptions. Manhattan will face, like everywhere else, irreversible environmental damage. Sea levels will rise and the coast will continue to encroach on the prime real estate of Manhattan. Its infrastructure is insufficient and its current form will not survive. The last remaining undeveloped land lies in Central Park. This is the site for new development, where ambitious measures will be taken to preserve the identity of the city. Outside the Outside presents an ambiguous and dystopian view of what the city will look like from outside the city walls. The frame of reference or perspective situates us within the shell of what was once Manhattan. Like Le Corbusier, the new Manhattan envisions massive structures. In fact, the inverse building footprint of Plan Boissin, towering 60 stories high and the size of a Manhattan city block. In the spirit of Super Studio cynicism, this plan explores an extreme capitalist capital. The majority of the park is preserved as such, and with a closer look, we see a fortified wall of buildings. From within the city walls, we see the grandeur of massive structures in relation to the landscape. Along the center of the park is a collection of Manhattan building icons that are reimagined as monuments of the new city. The monuments are a collection of the last 120 years of architectural styles, from the Flatiron Building to Woolworth to the Seagram, and the features of the buildings have been exaggerated with physical material and form manipulation. For example, at the Woolworth Building, Gothic revival is amplified, and the Downtown Athletic Center is split to emphasize the section, which is a nod to Koolhaas's delirious New York writing. The building section shows elements of free section arranged according to program and use. Each building complex is comprised of 4 towers: live, buy, work, and make, such that the buildings are self-sufficient. The exemplary floor plans are drawn to emphasize and describe program and organization more explicitly. They show a typical factory, bazaar, cubicle organization with management core, micro apartments contrasted with an upper floor agricultural farm, concept store, gallery space, flexible WeWork spaces, and a penthouse apartment. This thesis provides a critique and evaluation of precedents of Super Studio's cynical visionary narratives, Piranesi and Piranesi variations, visual descriptors, and Le Corbusier's city designs. It presents a categorization of visual communication techniques and ultimately a structural narrative based on employing these techniques. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Casey. Lucy, are you ready?
I am ready.
Great.
So this is my thesis project now more than ever, and I was supervised by Benjamin Smith. The United States is in one of the most severe drug-related crises in its history, and as a result, a new typology is being introduced, the Overdose Prevention Site, or OPS. OPSs are low barrier public facilities open to provide safe, clean, stigma-free environments for drug users to ingest pre-obtained drugs under supervision. Currently, there are 120 overdose prevention sites located over 10 countries. Since the opening of the first site in Switzerland in 1986, there has never been a reported overdose fatality in an overdose prevention site. As recent US legislation lays groundwork towards their actualization in the United States, this project will take several approaches to providing an architectural definition for this new typology. The thesis project comprises 3 parts: the manual, the fix, and the exhibition. The manual was created through a series of international site visits and research, leading to a physical book to be disseminated to firms constructing overdose prevention sites. The next phase, the fix, serves to test design guidelines produced in the manual. The final phase, the exhibition, functions as an annotated bibliography to the project and a means of challenging material assumptions regarding harm reduction in design. Hilary Sample, in her 2012 piece, Emergency Urbanism and Preventative Architecture, argues that during public health emergencies, design conventions are thwarted in ways that subvert the order they were originally supposed to uphold. Challenging healthcare needs modulates design in the pursuit of saving lives. The manual cultivates a set of deliberate strategies that foreground architecture's responsibility to contribute to conversations regarding health in the built environment. It will examine the overdose prevention site as a currently illegal typology of healthcare design to discuss the architect's potential for advocacy in cultivating the physical structures that combat public health epidemics. The pursuit to legalize an illegal typology takes a stance in one of the largest public health crises of our time, affirming the discipline belongs at the table as a collaborator in the design of healthcare environments, thus ensuring burden not fall exclusively on overtaxed public health activists or predatory political agencies. The manual expands on typologies and program case studies, including program layout through floor plans and perspectives, furnitures, fixes, and equipment, which outlines lists of needed harm reduction supplies, medical equipment, and furniture, and recommendations regarding public-private relationships, thresholds, and what I call facade honesty. Also about visibility and surveillance, asking architecture to reconcile its relationship to mechanisms of power, surveillance, architectures of control, and hostile architecture. And finally, how design can be used to address the pleasure paradox in harm reduction, in which more conservative policy around supervised consumption will permit the act of consumption, however, remains ignorant to its pleasures. The next phase of the project uses the small box pharmacy typology as a means of applying and testing research performed for the manual. Sarah Stevens argues, the typology of the small box bears the load of market forces, political treaties, consumer science, and technological innovation, each providing the opportunistic thinker with a diverse set of possibilities for change. Walgreens was chosen as part of what I call the Opioid Reparations Fund, in which for the purpose of this project, they will be donating a portion of their store. OPS sites and small box pharmacies are both typologies rooted in the physical spatialization of where drugs are located in the city and are demonstrative to society's changing relationship with the social acceptability of drug use. It also felt appropriate for the project to occupy a pre-existing building, as all of the sites I visited had been acquired through rental and renovation. Walgreens, as part of the small box typology, is what I think of as a mute typology, well known and familiar by their ubiquity and by experience, but unremarkable and easily manipulated. The first and smallest intervention took place in the Skid Row neighborhood of Los Angeles. This intervention is dedicated to safe supply of medical grade heroin and has the smallest footprint, located in the unused corner of the 2 other entries. The site is a parasite to its original, in which users can enter and exit quickly to fill their prescriptions. The site holds most pertinent today in the wake of the COVID-19 crisis and recent calls for safe supply. And here are the elevational changes. The integrated approach is located in Roanoke, West Virginia, an area hit particularly hard by the opioid crisis. This serves as an integrated option in which the OPS takes over the 1-hour photo located next to the pharmacy. It has both an interior and exterior entrance. Unlike the Mini, it is structured as part of its host and serves as another service within the Walgreens Live Well set of services. Here are those elevational changes at the primary entrance. Here in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia is the takeover. Several of the typologies from the manual have been employed in the same site beyond supervised use services, including mobile units, women-only areas, and safe supply. The full service model begins to look at a multi-pronged and personalized approach to service dissemination. And here are those elevational changes. For the exhibition, the most unique part of the Walgreens typology has been extracted. The sign boxes perched atop of Walgreens as a hat, which are often designed as per their regional vernacular, have been donated as part of the Opioid Reparations Fund. These boxes will be composed into an exhibition that explores what the Canadian Centre for Architecture's exhibition Imperfect Health calls a demedicalization process that unclouds the moralist conceptions of health in architecture such that the architect can recover one's capacity to be critical with respect to public health policies. The demedicalization process, along with a desire to use design as a means of addressing the pleasure paradox in harm reduction, informed the final part of the project, an exhibition at the Met Museum. This image examines the Met as a site for tourism and education. The Met receives about 7 million visitors a year. It is also home to the Met Gala, an annual event characterized by pomp and excess, and can be a site of protest. For example, activist organization PAIN, Prescription Addiction Intervention Now, headed by photographer and recovering opioid user Nan Golden, have done similar demonstrations in the Sackler wing of many galleries. They call for Purdue Pharma, Mundy Pharma, and Sackler Pharmaceutical companies worldwide to forfeit all profits from OxyContin as restitution to the communities and families that they've destroyed. The Met Sackler serves as a site and has been donated as part of their opioid reparations initiative. Here are the uses of program altogether and the new intervention for the exhibit, The Pleasure Paradox. So in this example, the Temple of Dendar has been removed. However, several of the programs have been kept, including the offering hall, the sanctuary, and the crypt. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lucy. I think we can all unmute now. Well, first, thanks everybody. That was really wonderful to see all those again, and in a condensed format. I know that was, in some ways probably a little bit of a challenge to condense, multiple months of work into a 7-minute presentation. But I really appreciated all of the effort to be able to do that and to still convey the deep tenets of a lot of the work. So fantastic. Kristen, maybe you can unmute too, and you can clue me in. I'm looking at the Q&A. The Q&A is open to all the participants who are watching. So if anybody from the audience wants to ask a question, we're more than happy to address those. I have prepared a few questions that I can lob out to the students, but we'd love to get some questions from the audience if there are any. No pressure, but we'd be happy to have them. But I'll just start with one, I guess. And first off, I guess what I'm really interested in is why, when thesis is optional at Tulane School of Architecture, why would you choose to do thesis? What was the reason behind your decision in wanting to do a thesis?
For me, I've always been interested in architecture pedagogy, as I've been in school now for 6 years, and I knew that I wanted to focus on design build education, which is why I came to Tulane, and being able to spend a year tackling a question on how can design build education be more accessible, it felt like a perfect place and time to dive in, especially with the resources that Tulane had, as well as Emily. It just seemed like the perfect opportunity to pursue that further.
For me, I didn't know what I was gonna do at the beginning, but I thought it was a really good opportunity to try to solve a problem that I'm passionate about or like truly concerned, and with the architecture tool that we've learned in school.
Yeah, I was really interested in how to construct a curriculum for myself, and kind of all of the, not just the topic, but the methodology that's created to construct a curriculum that is worthwhile. And I think continuing throughout the process, continuing to find kind of the holes in my logic, and to both solve problems and create new problems with kind of my own like methodology and logic structure.
Similarly, just creating your own parameters, your own design parameters, I thought was going to be a pretty interesting challenge, and it proved to be that way. But, you know, it was really enjoyable at the same time.
Yeah, I think especially the fall semester, the research component, that part was the most fun because it was kind of an investigation through reading, and we were or at least I was constantly like reading a book, deciding that was my new Bible, and then going to the bibliography and reading 20 more books about that. And it just kind of became like a web of research and investigation, which was like not a linear process, which is like a typical studio process.
Cool. Well, thanks everybody. We did get a question from the audience, and this is directed at Xiaolan. In the Hong Kong project, how would buildings respond to storm surge?
I think from my research, it's not there's not too much to concern about like storm, and like in my design, I have some like trenches, and like the water courtyard, it has a openings to like for water to go through, and I really tight and like all manageable to me.
Great, cool. I mean, this was something that all of you were already alluding to a little bit in your decision making regarding the choice to do thesis. But how would you describe the differences of working in thesis versus other courses you had taken as an architecture student?
I think the getting comfortable with being uncomfortable, not knowing the answers, and then like being equipped, giving yourself like the tools to find those answers, that was part of the thesis process, was not always knowing what your next step was.
Yeah, and I think to add on that, like in this, you can like your studio professor can't really provide you with the right answer for a thesis. Like they can lead you in the right direction, but I don't know, I think in a lot of studio courses there is kind of a right answer, whereas the right answer is completely abstract and like to your own determination.
Yeah, I think it's like a whole nother level of embracing ambiguity and just really, you know, having to accept that you might not even have the answer or know the answer to certain problems that or questions that you are creating. And I think that's something that's pretty interesting.
I think time definitely plays a big factor for us, actually having time to go on a hunt for the resources and read and just continue to consume, and also to take advantage of the winter break. We definitely were allotted a lot of time.
Actually, another question came in from Natalie DeLisa. And this is for Casey. How did your approach to your thesis morph as a result of COVID?
Thanks. So actually, the approach to thesis didn't so much change, but it was kind of a change in the climate of what was going on in the world for everyone. And for me, at the time, I was working on what I spoke about in like the middle part of the presentation, which was the explorations of techniques, and those were physical model drawings. And at the time that we switched to the remote instruction, I was working more with digital and like trying to find new ways to present my ideas. The way that Tulane, they put together the virtual exhibition, we kind of had to think quickly about like how the format of our projects would change, seeing as the projects would be now presentations on PowerPoint, Zoom presentations, and not like a physical exhibit. So that's how it changed. Yeah.
I've got a few more questions, and I'll try to respond as more questions from the audience come in. I do have some more specific questions to each of you. So maybe I'll ask Kalyn a question. Kalyn, one of the things that I was really curious about in your presentation was how you might foster, a maker's comfort level with design when design might not be their comfort zone. You know what I mean? Did you uncover any strategies, or how might you help somebody grow their knowledge about something that probably they might not have much knowledge in?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a wonderful question. And there are definitely a few case studies when looking at scheduling and syllabi. One example is in Berkeley, California, Girls Garage, which is currently teaching design and building to girls from the age of 7 to 17. And they've managed to work out different types of schedules of weekly workshops, weekend seminars, monthly seminars, and also these just like smaller integrated design seminars within a larger build project. And that seemed to be a successful model that a couple of other case studies have used, of really working in time for seminars of design within a larger community project. And ideally, the next step would really be testing out those weekend seminars to allow for people to get comfortable with kind of fundamentals in design, which I've been able to curate a lot of syllabi from other organizations.
Great, cool, thank you. A question did come in from the audience, and it's in relation to beauty. And the question is related to, was beauty at all considered as a driving factor in the work? Or how much was that something which was considered? Maybe especially in the case when we couldn't do physical models. I hope I've contextualized that question, or satisfied the tenets of that question. Beauty.
I'm happy to respond. I think in my condensed presentation, some of my slides were a little swallowed, but I think the final exhibition portion of mine speaks directly to beauty as a form of pleasure. So different material explorations and different architectural moments that refer to different kind of modernist architects who were specifically concerned with health, and begin to kind of question where we've gone to a kind of medicalized version of health environments, and question overdose prevention sites' relationship to a more medicalized model. So kind of beauty or pleasure or delight became a driving force for that portion of the project.
Great, cool. Henry, I've got a question for you. So I was really curious to think about the way that your project could possibly expose principles that could offer opportunities to think about other cities other than New Orleans. Right. And I was curious if in the research or in the design or in the work, if if you ever thought about maybe broader application to certain principles that have been sort of focused on in the context of New Orleans.
I think, sorry, you finish?
No, I'm finished.
I think that really, I was just really trying to look at how you could connect a raised environment and sort of I'm trying to think of the right word, recreate a way of living that, you know, was dedicated to the ground plane. And so just trying to focus on like how that could change from city to city depending on the site. I don't know if I did a great job of answering that, but
I think that's great. I mean, I think just ways in which, you know, environmental conditions recreate urban contexts, I think is certainly something that more places than New Orleans will likely have to grapple with. And I think it's exposing ways to start to imagine ways of addressing that. You know, Kalyn, I've got a question for you too. I was thinking about scale of your intervention, and it's a monster, right? I mean, it's a mega structure. It's huge. And I was curious if you had thought about ways where maybe a smaller scale invention could also be possible. You know, maybe like a strategy as an infill. I'm not sure, but I was curious if you had thought at all about maybe smaller scale investigations that could also yield some of the results that you're hoping for.
Thank you for asking. I think for me, I was thinking to divide this into like different phases, like using the government budget and just do like first phase, and then like using the money from like selling out those and get to like a further development. And I think like right now the problem is like really severe. So I think, yeah, of course there's like some like infills that could be done, but I think it needs a kind of big gesture.
Right. I mean, I think one of the provocative things that your study exposes is the crisis itself, and then what it would take to alleviate even some of that, you know, and it's helpful to visualize that, let alone, you know, all of the ways that it would have to manifest in reality. Mm-hmm. Lucy, I've got a question for you. I mean, it's hard to ask Lucy and Casey questions since like I've been asking them questions for almost a year now, so they've probably heard enough from me about that stuff. But Lucy, I wanted to know where architecture is most potent in its conversation related to public health. Where can it be most potent?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think my answer kind of before March would be as a means of advocacy. And I think in terms of my project, architecture that doesn't just kind of sit on the benches waiting for policy to develop, but architecture that can kind of perform research and perform kind of case studies and, for lack of a better word, like do the math to explain that like something actually is safe. One really interesting project by an architect that I know was just to measure HVAC systems to determine how many particles could be removed, how many fentanyl particles could be removed with different HVAC systems, cost them out to kind of fix the idea that like smoking inside was as dangerous as it was perceived. So I think from a very technical perspective, I would have answered that before. I think with what I'm kind of seeing with stuff in the wake of COVID-19 and some of architecture's response is, I think, not being afraid of immediate action. I think that some of the projects around the creation of face shields and just using the materials that you have in an interesting way as rapidly as possible has been really interesting. And so I think just not being afraid to use the tools and the expertise that we have in order to exist interdisciplinarily.
Great, yeah. Well, I think we have time for one more question. Kristen, just let me know. I think we're at 6 p.m. And Casey, I do want to ask you, this is maybe an impossible question, but it's also kind of a simple one. So which drawing do you want to do next?
Oh, I think I definitely miss working with my hands. So, no, I'm getting an echo, but I think a model would be my next move for sure.
Not a drawing. Yeah, that's great.
Not a drawing.
Okay, so then which model?
A site model.
Cool.
Of course.
All right, that's fair. And I would love to see it. Well, I think we're out of time. It's 6:02 p.m. So thank you everybody who is still in the audience. And thank you again to all of our students. It was a really wonderful late afternoon for me to get to see all of you and to hear all of your presentations again. So thanks everybody. And we'll hopefully see you all soon under different circumstances.